Okay, good. It didn't give me that silly button to have to run to the back and click, so that's good. All right, residential sales contract is what we are going to start with. Oh, it didn't switch for you guys on the screen, did it? Maybe that's just my screen in the room. Do you guys at home on Zoom see?
Yes.
You guys
Yes,
see the
you can see it.
residential sales contract?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
And then it has the thing that says this meeting is being recorded on top of it.
okay, awesome.
Okay, it's gone. Thank you.
That's in case we didn't understand the first time.
Yeah, and you're gonna have to turn, yeah, okay, thanks. All right, sorry, guys, hold on 1 second. And Lily, you're gonna have to turn that off because we get feedback in the room. Sorry, somebody in the room has it turned on. I'm gonna wait until it's logged out. Okay, thank you, sorry. Do you have the documents from right up here, the packet? Yep, right on the counter right here. Okay, that's okay. And I am going to text our tech support upstairs so that we can get these documents back on the screen, and then we're gonna get started. I don't know why this computer down here hates me so much. Okay, here we go. Residential sales contract. So this is what you will use for all of your offers between now and the end of the year. This document is what is going to change. Okay, don't be afraid. I promise you, the changes are good. You will be fine. The sales contract is offered on blank date between the buyer and the seller. Okay, so the date, remember, the date isn't as important here as the ratification date is, just like the other documents that we've been going on. This is the date you're preparing it. It should be as close to the date that you're submitting it as possible. It is a little more important than the date on the buyer agency agreement and the listing agreement. However, it's really not as relevant as the ratification date. So don't freak out if you're starting to prepare the offer a week in advance and the ratification date comes much later. Okay, the buyer name is how the buyer will take title, right? So their full legal name or their legal first name, middle initial, and last name, right? Not a nickname or common name. Seller is how the current deed is held. So the tax record is what's going to give you the indication on that. We looked at the tax record on Wednesday to show a couple of examples of how to know what exactly should be written here and some like red flags on what to look at. Like you don't put the R/S, excuse me, for right of survivorship or SURV in survivorship. You'll also know if it's a trust because the TR is there. So it'll tell you that that's a trustee from the trust. Something that will be very helpful to you is that when you're making an offer, you are getting the Depor disclosure and lead-based paint, if applicable, from the listing agent prior to making that offer. And so you're going to verify, right? Because sometimes we're looking at the tax record and we can't really tell whether or not the first name is the last name or last name is the first name because sometimes it's just not clear. So you're going to be able to verify that on the Depor disclosure. Okay, the brokerages get listed here. So the listing brokerage, and if we are the buying brokerage, right, we would be the cooperating brokerage representing the buyer. So it would be KW United whatever your market center is, right? Falls Church, Alexandria/Kingstown, or KW United-Fredericksburg. A note for you guys here. If you get an offer on your listing and it only says KW United, that's okay. You do not need to make the change to clarify which market center it is if it only says KW United. In Bright MLS, our market centers only say KW United. They don't actually have the ending with which market center it is. So you will get offers that come in where the agent doesn't know to put which market center after KW United. So that's okay. If you're using that optional information sheet that we went over last week with the listings, you're going to put on there KW United dash whatever your market center is. And if it's a good agent, they're going to look at that and they're going to fill it out properly. Don't waste a counter offer situation and muddying up how clean the offer looks to add that. Okay. But if you're on the buyer side, please fill out which market center you're in. All right. The real property section. So this real property section is just like on the listing agreement. Excuse me, the tax map and ID number go here. From the legal description, you're looking at lot, section, and subdivision. So we talked about how you can determine this from the tax record, that if it's not up in the top section with an actual item that says lot or section, you can read it from the legal description. I taught you guys last week how to chunk that out when we looked at the tax record on Wednesday. Parking spaces. Another reminder that parking spaces do not go in the contract unless they are deeded with the property. So this means if it's like an HOA or a condo association where it's just assigned spaces from the HOA or condo association, you do not put this parking space numbers here because those parking spaces belong to the HOA. They don't belong to the property owner. So you don't put the parking spaces there. Deed book or LIBOR number and the page folio number go here. There generally is a spot that those are filled in. The deed book is usually the year of the last transfer. So that'll give you an idea of what you're looking for. And then the street address. Price and financing. Okay, let's talk about this for a second. We have a lot of situations right now where our clients are trying to compete to win, and they might be qualified for multiple different types of financing, and they want to put here what is going to make them look the best. So let's just take what the document says first, and then we'll talk about how it affects the rest of the contract. So the down payment is their down payment, right? So you can fill in a dollar amount or a percentage. The financing, the first trust is a dollar amount or a percentage, and it would be conventional VA, FHA, USDA, or some other type of financing, right? That it might be, private money or something. If they have a second trust, you would put that in the second line. If it's seller financing of any type, that goes in the third line. And the total financing then is brought down. So if there's something in lines 1 and 2, then the total of that is what goes in the total financing. And then the sale price goes below that. So the down payment plus the total of all of the items in the financing section of B equals your sale price. Yes, Gailey.
Should I hold my questions?
No, if it's specific to what I'm talking about on here, that's you can ask the question.
Okay, so for Vhda loan, since it is like a conventional, very often, right? It's considered a conventional, but would you get conventional and other?
Yes.
And then if they're getting the grant, then the financing is 101.20. something percent. So,
Correct.
sorry, I just make sure. I did it
Yes,
correctly. So the first trust is 97% and the second, so you use the second trust line for that? For
Okay,
total of 91?
So in VHDA financing, they can either get a loan or a grant. It's not always a grant that they don't have to pay back. So it would be conventional. I would mark conventional and other and put VHDA, and I would put that the first trust is 97%. They're getting the grant for the down payment. But I would indicate that it is VHDA. Okay,
I'm trying to see how. to break it
so
up.
let's go over that again. So there are a lot of our buyers that qualify for the VHDA grant, which is down payment assistance. Okay, this is limited income buyers. They have to qualify in the income limits. A lot of first-time buyers are qualifying for this. It can be either conventional or FHA financing as the base type of financing, and then their down payment is provided by VHDA. Okay, the Virginia Department of Housing Authority is who provides this money to the buyer for their down payment. So their down payment is still their down payment. Okay, it's whatever money they're getting from VHDA. So that goes in the down payment percentage line. And then the amount they're getting from the conventional financing, because that's their mortgage, goes in the first trust line. So they're only financing, it's usually 3% from VHDA and 97% on the conventional loan is generally how these are worked out.
I'll talk to you later. So they have 101.5% financing. So what we did is we put 97% as a first trust conditional VHDA, and then the second trust was 4.5%.
Okay, so the 4.5%, so in Gailey's situation, she's asking about the 4.5% from VHDA. So the only time the 4.5% would go in the second trust line is if it's a loan from the VHDA that the buyer has to pay back. If it's just a grant where they're giving money towards the down payment and closing costs, then it does not go in that section B.
Okay, so it would be, say, so it would be 97% is first trust, and then the down payment is 4.5%.
The down payment is still 3%.
So how do you count for the additional 1.5%?
You don't have to count in VHDA for the additional 1.5% because it's a credit towards their closing costs. Okay, so the total of the down payment plus whatever they're financing equals the total financing.
So down payment is the grant, and the other would be the loan.
Correct,
Right, so you don't account for the 1.5%.
correct.
That's
Correct, that's right. Yeah, so the down payment, it doesn't matter the source of the down payment. It could be gift funds from their mom, from their aunt, from their next door neighbor, from VHDA, it doesn't matter, okay? Now, if they are doing a VA loan, okay, so VA is different, all right? So VA, they can finance their funding fee. Okay, so if they are financing more than 100% of the sale price because they're financing their funding fee, you would put down payment as 0. And the first trust would be the 101%. Okay, because their loan that they are taking out is actually 101% of the sale price. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Did I lose you guys on that? You want section B in financing where it says first trust and second trust to match exactly with the loan application at the lender. It's very, very important that whatever the loan application is that the buyer is filling out with the lender matches what is in section 2 of this contract. Okay,
Can I ask a question before you move on? You had said
course.
that with the grant, if it's a grant for their down payment, that we have to note that. Should we put a text box and say 3.5% VHDA grant next to the down payment?
I would just click the other section under
Okay.
First Trust. I would do conventional and I would check other and just put VHDA.
But we don't need to put grant for their down
in this
payment
section.
then.
Right, I would just
Okay.
indicate here, and the reason I would do it there is because with VHDA, there's an extra layer on their financing approval, right? Because it has to go through all of the conventional underwriting first. And then once conventional underwriting is complete, then it can go to VHDA, and then VHDA will give its blessing or not. And so it's an extra couple of days. And VHDA generally doesn't kick it back. Once it gets that far, like the lender knows that it'll be okay. But it is that extra layer. So that's why I would put it there. So the sale price right here. And then seller subsidy underneath. I am seeing some seller subsidies right now. Be careful when you're asking for a seller subsidy, if you're increasing the sale price to be able to give a credit back to your buyer when you're making the offer. Be careful about the appraisal. Make sure that if you're on the listing side that you think it's going to appraise. If you're on the buyer side, make sure that you think it's going to appraise. Because then it could be for nothing that you went through that whole exercise if your buyer needs money towards their closing costs. The contingency for financing is tied very specifically to this section right here, price and financing. So when we talk about specified financing in any of our contingencies, conventional, VA, FHA, USDA, doesn't matter. It has to match what's here. All right, the next section says financing contingency and application. So you still have to fill out section 2 if they're getting a loan. You have to tell the seller, how is the buyer going to pay for this property? Do they have cash? If they have cash, then in down payment, you put 100%, right? That's easy because there is no financing. But the buyer can take a risk and say, this contract is not contingent on financing. I don't like when buyers do that because contingencies are only about earnest money deposits and sellers being able to sue for default. Okay, because unless they have cash in the bank to get them to the closing table, they need the loan, right? So it doesn't make them better equipped to get to the closing table if they take the risk and say, I'm not going to make my offer contingent on this loan, right? It just means that they're willing to take the risk and they think that it's only their earnest money deposit, and it's not only their earnest money deposit that they're putting at risk. The buyer could be sued by the seller for default. And if you're in a down market, or the buyer offered way above the list price so that they could win, and then they can't get to closing, then they could actually be on the hook for the difference between what they sell to the next buyer because of offering way above where it actually could sell. So this is something that is a big frustration right now. And this is part of where the changes will come in January that we've been working through in the forms committee to try to make sure that everybody, buyers and sellers, understand what page 1 actually means, right? If it's contingent or not contingent. If the buyer puts on here that they're going to get conventional financing, they're putting 20% down, they have a lender letter to back it up, right? And then they decide to switch it to VA financing, right? Because they didn't submit it at VA financing because they think that VA financing is frowned upon. And they switch it after it's ratified, they lose their contingency. So it just means that they have no more way out when it comes to the financing contingency. There's some other things we're going to talk about when we get to the VA addendum, but the contingency itself goes away.
Can you rewrite in a new contingency if the seller will do it?
You can agree, and there is a very, very specific way to write that contingency if you're switching, if the seller will agree to it, and the buyer can unilaterally change financing without the seller's agreement. That's in the contract. It says, it's pre-printed language that says that the buyer is within their rights to change to alternative financing, was what it's called. But certain types of financing require the seller to acknowledge certain things. So it's not as easy to switch on
So
certain
the
things.
buyer can change, they just lose their contingency when they do.
Yeah, and certain types of financing require the seller to acknowledge things, like on appraisals. It can get tricky.
Can you present if your buyer qualifies for both conventional and VA? Can you present that when you are negotiating that they qualify for both? And would that be?
Yeah, so the question is, could you present the lender letters that show they qualify for both types, like conventional and VA? And the answer is yes, and I think that you should. I always think that it's best to put on the offer the type of financing that you think your client's actually going to pursue. And it's an education thing for a seller to say, you know, to show them why one type of financing is better than another. Someone who's doing conventional with 5% down isn't necessarily a better qualified purchaser than a VA purchaser who's doing 100% financing, because that VA purchaser might have, you know, 40% down payment sitting in the bank, but it's cheaper to finance 100%, and they have earned the right to do that. So they actually might be the more qualified purchaser. The other thing with VA is when it comes to the appraisals, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to those addendums and how to sort of negotiate that up front. All right, so financing contingency and application. So if the contract is contingent on financing, then the buyer has to make written application for financing and their homeowner's insurance within 7 days after ratification. The buyer also, in this paragraph, grants permission for their brokerage, the cooperating brokerage, and the lender to disclose information to the listing brokerage and seller, any general information about the progress of the loan application and approval process. Okay, so this means that when the listing agent, right, you as the listing agent, or if you're on the buy side, when the listing agent calls the lender, right, listing agents should always be in communication with the buyer's lender to just check on things. They are allowed to give general, generic information, nothing confidential, nothing specific, but general information about the progress, right? Yes, the appraisal's been ordered, right? Yes, we got the appraisal back, everything's good. We only have a couple things left in underwriting and it'll be fine. Yes, the CD's been disclosed, right? All things that are very necessary to know about the timing and the timeline of whether or not you'll close on time. And the seller also is acknowledging here that they will comply with all reasonable lender requirements. Well, that's quite vague. Basically, what that means is that in section B, if the buyer has said, I'm getting a loan, the seller needs to let the appraiser in, right? That's basically what that means. The seller can't say, well, you didn't make it contingent on financing, so why do I have to let your appraiser in? Well, you can't force the buyer into default if you're a seller, right? By not letting the appraiser in, because obviously the buyer can't get a loan if their lender requires the appraisal. Okay, deposit. This is the earnest money deposit section. So the buyer's deposit in the amount of blank. So you guys are going to check that first box, okay? There should never be an opportunity for this second box to be checked. And I see it checked all the time. The buyer's deposit, the amount of, check the box, blank, via check or bank wired funds. You'll skip the next section because no one is doing an earnest money deposit via note, right? You're not saying, I'll pay you at some point later, right? My earnest money deposit, I'm not even sure why it's in there. So you skip that section, note due and payable on blank, okay? Shall be held by the escrow agent. Who's your escrow agent? Universal Title, love it. You guys all passed the test. Universal Title or whomever the title company is that's handling closing, right? We know Universal Title is a wonderful title company. It's so easy to deposit those earnest money checks. The clients take a picture with the app on their phone and then they send you the receipt, right? And then you upload that to Command. And then I'm very happy when I see the proof of deposit and I don't have to return the copy of the check and say, this is not proof of deposit, right? I don't like doing that. The next section says buyer has delivered the deposit to the escrow agent or will deposit to the escrow agent by blank number of days after ratification. Okay, in what circumstance would a buyer have delivered the deposit to the escrow agent before the contract's ratified? Well, it could be a situation where the buyer had already been ratified on something else and the contract was released and they're still looking. And it is okay to not have the funds actually given back and deposited in their bank account and then sent back. So the buyer just has to put something in writing to the escrow agent, right, to Universal Title saying, please hold my funds because I'm going to write another offer. Okay, so that's when it would have already been delivered. Will deliver deposit to escrow agent by blank days after ratification. Okay. Please pay attention to your calendar when you are working on an offer. Because if you are submitting an offer on a Thursday and you ratify on a Friday and you say that it's going to be delivered 2 days after ratification, your buyer might not be able to comply with that. Okay? Because it's the weekend, and if they want to take a check and drop it off at Universal Title and get a receipt that's signed by, you know, Annie over at Universal or Bob or Shannon Catlett or John McLaurin or somebody, right? They're not gonna be able to get it. So pay attention to your dates. Also, if they're out of town, right, and they want to overnight a check. So 5 days is probably the most that you would want to put in there. Just pay attention on your dates. This next section is actually not really relevant to any of us in the room, but it's reminding brokerages that if they are licensed and they are the escrow agent, that the brokerage has 5 business banking days to get that money in, unless there's a longer period of time that's negotiated in that blank up top. Julie, did you have a question?
Where is Universal Title Company physically located?
In that building right there on the first floor. We can actually see in their windows on the first floor right there. That's the Falls Church office. In Kingstown, they are in the, like on the other side of the elevator, in their building. And then in Fredericksburg, they are in the building, like on the back side of the parking lot. So very convenient for all of us. Okay, settlement date. Settlement date. This is another one that I now have my calendar out when I am reviewing ratified contracts. And until the end of August, I didn't actually ever have to have my calendar out when I was reviewing contracts. And there have been a lot of challenges over the last month with dates. on the contracts falling on weekends and holidays. So I'm not sure what's happening, and I'm trying to catch these for you when they're coming to me. If the settlement date written in this blank falls on a weekend or a holiday, the default language is that closing is the previous business day. Okay. The lenders generally don't like that because they need as much time as possible, right? They don't want to move it up 3 or 4 days, right? That's a lot. If it's a Monday holiday, right? They don't want to move it up to Friday. So pay attention to those dates. As we get into the like Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's holidays, the courthouses tend to close like a half a day, the day before a holiday, and then give themselves a long weekend. So we will share with you when we know that there are early closings for the courthouses, because we'll know in advance. And so we'll want you to pay attention to that as well, because that will affect reporting and it can affect locks for buyer's loans and all kinds of fun things. Okay, please pay attention to your dates. Also, a note on that, it needs to be an actual date in that line. It cannot say blank number of days from ratification or blank number of days from something else happening. It needs to be an actual date in that line. The next section in bold talks about the buyer's right in Virginia to choose the settlement agent. So, what does that mean really in practice? It means that the buyer can't force the seller to settle with their closing company. It means that the seller can't force the buyer to close with their settlement company. It means that the buyer gets to say who they want to close with. The buyer can choose who the seller requests, right? In your offer instruction sheet, you can say, you know, seller requests universal title, seller prefers universal title, or seller will close with universal title, like hint, hint, nudge, nudge, right? And then if the buyer doesn't have a preference, when they're trying to compete, right, that might make them look better on your listing when you say this is who they're going to close with. The buyer side of the transaction handles the funds, the recordation of the deed. They handle all of that. If you're on the listing side, and you can have Universal handle the seller side, and then Universal communicates with the buyer side if the buyer side does not choose Universal. If you feel pressured and your buyer feels pressured by a listing agent to choose their title company, in this section right here, the buyer can say that they'll choose the seller's title company and then send notice after ratification changing, okay? The challenge that you will run into is up top, if you have put the escrow agent, is that other title company. This part up here requires a sales contract addendum. Down here, it can be changed unilaterally. The other title company, unless the seller's using them too, probably doesn't want to hold the EMD. It's okay if the seller's using that other title company for the EMD to stay there. They'll work it out, right? As far as the funds are concerned, to get it funded, that other company is going to have to send the earnest money deposit to Universal Title so that the deal is properly funded. Yes, Gailey.
so just to make sure I understand what you're saying, so you could write this saying, okay, we're going to comply with what the seller's asking, you know. You could unilaterally change this,
Yes,
but if you don't have to do a sales addendum to the top because you don't have to have the money moved. So you could just send the unilateral notice and not do the sales addendum.
correct. If the seller is still closing with company one, right? Now, I will say that company one probably wants the money moved because they are now not handling the financial aspect of it. And so they actually might direct that there be a sales contract addendum so that the money can be moved. And in that case, the other side won't fight it, right? Because they don't want to hold the money. But it can't be done on a notice for the money to be moved.
You don't have to do it unless you request it. So
Yeah, I mean, right, and your client would want it moved. I mean, let's just be clear, right? Like the buyer's gonna want their money where they want their money, you know, where they want the closing done. It's just, it's a little
So
different
then
of a
if
process.
it requires a sales contract addendum, put the seller to sign it in.
They could, but the escrow agent, number one, is going to help with that process, right? That settlement attorney probably would get involved because they don't want to hold the money, right? And they would have to deliver the money to to Universal Title at some point anyway, for it to fund. The seller side of the transaction, so if buyer's using Universal Title and seller side is using, you know, ABC Title. The seller side there's nowhere in the contract that it asks where the seller's closing. So it doesn't need to be added here to the contract. It gets a little muddy and complicated when things are added that it doesn't ask for. If you're on the seller side and you're not closing with the buyer's title company, it's very nice to tell the listing agent in an email, hey, my seller's closing with whoever, right? After you ratify. It doesn't go in the contract.
I meant listing agent as part of the response, but little hash marks, a little
Yeah.
note about the seller using a different title company.
Yeah, it's an unnecessary counteroffer that requires initials. The buyer agrees to contact the settlement agent within 10 days of ratification to schedule settlement. 10 days is a long time, but this is to make sure that everything is, you know, in order. So the lender is going to then need to be in contact with the title company. The title company has to, you know, open their file so that they can get their package over to the lender. The lender can review it. So there's a lot of things that go behind the scenes. Okay, down payment. This paragraph is interesting. The balance of the down payment will be paid on or before settlement in certified or cashier's check or by bank wired funds as required by settlement agent. Okay, seems pretty self-explanatory, but something happened at some point somewhere where a buyer said they didn't know, I guess, that they had to, so it's now in the contract. An assignment of funds will not be used without prior written consent of seller. Okay, two things I want to highlight here. Please make sure that your buyers understand that if they are wiring funds, it cannot be done via ACH transfer. Their settlement companies are not allowed to accept ACHs. So if it's sent via ACH, it goes through this weird process and then the settlement company's bank has to reject it. And then it goes through another weird process to go back to the buyer. So it will delay things. So make sure that they are reminded if they're going to wire the funds, it has to be done via wire, not an ACH transfer. Okay.
What does ACH stand for? Or just give me, like, what is the distinction?
In ACH it's almost like a direct deposit kind of thing from one account to another, where a wire goes through different channels through the Federal Reserve Bank and is tracked differently. Okay, the assignment of funds. They're bringing up the assignment of funds here as a reminder also that if the buyer is selling another home, so they haven't actually received the money into their own bank account to be able to then send to the title company, and they're just going to have the funds, once they're available from the sale of their other home, sent directly to Universal Title. It has to be agreed to by the seller. Okay, and there's a document for that. Okay, delivery. Paragraph 6 on delivery has nothing to do with HOA and condo docs. This is for everything else. This is for your basic notices and addenda and every other piece of communication outside of HOA and condo docs. In the seller section, so 6A, do not leave this blank if you are a buyer's agent. If you don't have offer instructions from the listing agent, fill in the listing agent's email address. If you do not fill anything in here, it automatically defaults to the property address. And if you are trying to deliver notice to void the contract and you don't and you email it to the agent and there's some dispute going on, you actually would have to deliver it to the property address physically in order to comply with the contract that you are voiding. So just put the agent's address there. If you're the buyer, I suggest that we put our own address, our own email address here. I don't want anything going directly to my clients. I want to know before they get it on any of this normal stuff. That's why I'm here. That's why they hired me. I don't want another agent communicating with them directly on delivery of things. Same thing if, you know, on the seller side, when you're putting out that optional information sheet, you're putting in there delivery instructions, right? You're putting your email address. If you're using the TC company, or you have a team and you're using, you know, your admin, or you have another person that's working for you, you can put your admin's email address there for those notices. So I know I've seen some of you that are using our leverage services. I've seen Kyle's name there. You can absolutely put Kyle. You know, Misty, if Becca wants to have you listed there to be receiving copies of any notices or, you know, addendums, that's up to you guys how you want to do that. I just would not ever put the clients, okay? And please make sure, especially, you know, it's not a problem until it's a problem, right? So as soon as something nerve-wracking or contentious, could be contentious, comes up, be very careful, right? If you're delivering a notice to void, if you're a release, if there's something that has a deadline, make sure that you're delivering it to what's on here. There could be a situation where they have a different email address on here than what you've been communicating with, right? So as an example, you guys have two email addresses for me, right? You have my SML Homes email address and the KW email address. The KW email address forwards to my SML Homes email address. So if I put on my contract that I want delivery to the KW email address, but I've always been emailing you from the SML Homes, it might not be considered delivery if you just deliver it back to the SML Homes. So you may want to deliver it to both email addresses. Make sure they get it. Okay. All right, next section, Residential Property Disclosure Act. Depor. This is the Depor Disclosure Act. So what is this? This is the one-page document that we had gone over earlier in the week. And what this says is that if it is not provided to the buyer prior to ratification, right? So this is why I harp on the fact that if you're a buyer's agent, The buyer's agents get it ahead of time because the seller side is usually putting it in bright MLS. You're going to pull the documents down. The buyer can void if it is delivered after ratification. They have 3 days to review and void. Okay. Seller side, it's very important to make sure that you have this available, right, and provided, and that it is in the contract before you have ratification, because the buyer can void.
Is that,
The current version would, I don't think it would hold up. I mean, if it was like from 1996, right, then that would be a problem. But if it's the 2020 versus 2021, I don't think that that would actually hold up. But yes, pay attention to the dates at the bottom of the documents because it will tell you whether you're working with the current version on that. And then the reason I say that story is because on that document itself, there's just a link to send it to the Depor website with the updated 4-page document. So I think that's why between the 2020 and 2021, it wouldn't matter. All right, now we get to HOAs and condo associations. And these 2 paragraphs are essentially the same. You're going to be checking the box that says the property is or is not located within an HOA, and it is or is not located within a condo association. It could be both, right? There are several areas where the condo associations are within an HOA. So you may be checking both. And this is just a copy and paste from the Code of Virginia that explains what the responsibilities are of the seller to deliver the resale documents. The buyer has 3 days to cancel the contract if they see fit. And we talked about this last week where they don't actually have to have a reason. They can have a reason. They don't have to have a reason. They can get cold feet. They can have found something better that came on the market. They can be mad because the seller wouldn't do repairs from the home inspection. It can be any number of reasons. The buyer can void. So have those HOA docs ready, listing agents, or as soon as it's ratified to deliver those documents. One change that came about last year, because this paragraph in general is not negotiable. So statute supersedes everything. This is one of those places in the contract that the buyer and seller can't negotiate on, right? Where, you know, the saying is everything's negotiable. Well, everything except a couple of things, right? And this is one of them. The buyer cannot waive their right to void in this paragraph. So they can't try to make their offer stronger by saying, we waive our rights, we won't void once we get the HOA docs. They can say it, but it's not enforceable, right? So they can change their mind and they win, buyer wins, right? One of the problems that was coming up was that buyers and sellers were also negotiating an extension of that review period previously, because something would happen where the documents were delivered incomplete, or they were delivered on Friday morning, and HOAs have baker's hours and they work till noon on Fridays, and a buyer couldn't get the information they needed to confirm whether they could build their pool or run their home-based business or park their branded plumbing truck out front of their house. So they have added to the statute that the review period can be extended for 4 days, 4 more days, up to a total of 7 days. So that's what the state of Virginia gave us. That was their concession. So that is what's negotiable. And there is a document for that. So instead of 3 days, they can have up to 7.
There's a separate item,
There is a document, yeah, and it's called the extension of the review period. When there are two associations, the time period to void is based on the delivery of the latest, right? So it's up to 3 days after the last set of documents is delivered. Now, what do you fill into the section where it says for the delivery of the packet or notice of non-availability, right? So if there is no availability of the packet or the seller is not able to provide the packet, the seller has to provide notice saying, we're not delivering you a packet because we can't get one, right? So now that's when your 3 days start. But generally it's delivery of the packet. There's a blank for if electronic and then a blank for if hard copy. Both of those blanks need to be filled in. It's not a choice for the buyer which version they get. It's actually up to the seller. And in some cases, the seller doesn't even have a choice. The seller is at the mercy of their HOA. There's some small HOAs that don't do electronic. They just have hard copies. So in the electronic section, you would fill in your email address and your client's email address. In this section, you put both. And the hard copy would go directly to your client's address, not to you, not to the office. It would go directly to your clients. So why do I look at this paragraph differently than the regular delivery paragraph where I don't want anything going directly to your clients? Because this is the get out of jail free card, right? I do not want us to be responsible for missing an email that goes to spam or something happened to us and we were incapacitated or whatever. And maybe we typed in something wrong in the email address, right? It could have been a typo, anything. I want to make sure that it goes to both places, right? So that it gets delivered. I want it to go to both of us when it's electronic, because obviously you can have it go to multiple places. If it's hard copy, it can only go to one. You should be seeing the disclosure statement, that 6 pages that comes on top that we talked about where those violations are listed. We talked about that last week. As the buyer's agent, you want to see that with your client so that you know what's going on. And then you can have that communication with the listing agent like we talked about. And actually, we talked about this on Friday. I'd ask the broker for anybody that joined us on Friday. We talked about these violations and whether or not they have to be fixed and not, and how you communicate that. So that's what goes here.
Is the delivery, is it certified mail if it goes out, or is it just regular US mail if it goes out?
So it can be US mail, regular US mail. If it goes out regular US mail, then it's not 3 days. It's actually 7 days, and it's from the postmark. So it can be it's 3 days if hand delivered. But if it goes out in the mail, then it's from the postmark. If the packet is being sent out by the association, then it's up to the association to track that, you know, and have proof that they've sent it out. Okay. Delivery is what's important here, not receipt. So I want to repeat that. It's not receipt of the HOA packet or condo association packet, it's delivery. So you email the HOA docs out, right? Because you get them first and then you send them to the other side and nobody confirms they got them, right? You haven't heard from listing agent or buyer's agent that they received them. A week goes by, buyer's agent says, oh, just saw your email, got them, thanks. 3 days is long gone. They don't get to start their 3 days, right? It's delivery. There used to be a document in the forms library for the purchaser to acknowledge receipt of the documents, and it's gone because it doesn't matter, right? That's not what the paragraph says.
Shannon, I have a question, please.
Yes, Mary.
So you mentioned that the buyer can find another property on the market, and will be a reason to go out of the contract with the HOA packet.
Mhm.
So are you, as a buyer agent, encouraging your buyer if they said, Mary, there is another house come on the market, let's see it. So what is guaranteed that they will take it? Okay, if I go out of this contract and get accepted with the other one, what is the scenario, or what is the script with my buyers if they say, let's see another houses until the HOA packet comes?
So I'm not taking them out to see other homes while we're ratified.
Mm-hmm.
So the question was because the buyer can void on HOA docs simply because they found another home that they want to write on. What's your script if they say, oh, this other home came on the market while they're waiting for the HOA docs? What's your script?
Mm-hmm.
So because I don't take buyers out unless they're qualified, unless their lender can tell me that they can buy 2 houses at the same time, I'm not going out to see another, right? The only time that I would be taking buyers out to see another home while they're under contract is if they're under contract as a backup offer, right? So they're not locked in to the first one. If they want to take the risk and void on the first one and then go see what they can do on the second one, that's fine. If they want to go to an open house, I can't stop them. But I'm not taking them out because that's misrepresentation of their ability as a ready, willing, and able buyer. And I'm not scheduling an appointment to take them into a home. And it's actually a discussion in my buyer consultations. I'm setting the expectation about what the process is like. And I'm explaining things. So in my buyer consultation, I'm actually reviewing the contract with the clients at a 30,000 foot level, right? This is what happens. This is the process. These are the trigger points that, at different things. And I talk about the HOA docs, right? And I tell them things like, while you can void, right, for any reason whatsoever, that's not what it's for, right? It's just not what it's for. So then when we get to the point where we're making the offer, I'm having the conversation about, okay, are you sure? Because you might not get it and you might get it, right? Like you might actually win, right? So are you really sure you want it? Because that's another thing that's happening right now is buyers are just throwing money around, right? Because it's just numbers to them. And then once they ratify, then it's like, right? So I'm having those conversations as well. So I'm setting the expectations of what it's going to be like.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Misty.
Is there anything in the HOA docs that would be considered like not current if you were to order them before a contract was ratified? And let's say it took a couple months, is there any risk involved in ordering it before, like something might expire? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So the question is about how current the HOA docs have to be, and technically there is no time frame. So yes, things might not be current. It might not be the most recent minutes or the most recent copy of the budget. And if they're really old, if it's like 3 years old, then that's when the buyer would exercise their right to void. And so that's a risk that the seller has to think about when they want to save money right? If they ordered them a while ago and then the house came off the market, you can always order. I mean, they charge you, but the bigger HOAs are going to allow you to order updates.
For myself, I do wait to order that until after my selling clients clear all the problems. So I've had that bad experience where they got that cover letter and there's all those hits. I was like, I ordered this too early.
So actually, Ron, that's the only way that you know what the violations are, is ordering the HOA docs, getting that cover letter.
Oh, well, that's one way.
It is the actual only way, because the disclosure package comes with that Depor 6 pages on top. And so when you deliver the whole package with that, the list of the violations that are on there, then those specific violations are what have to be cleared by the HOA with the cure letter. So I don't know if you guys knew that in the HOAs, there's different people that do the inspections during the year versus who does them for the resale packages. So you might have a client who had, 1 or 2 things on the semi-annual inspections, and then all of a sudden they get their resale package and they're like, what the heck is all of this? And it's because it's different people that do it.
Well, in my case, I must have been the more fortunate one, because I have actually been able to have my owners have that walkthrough ahead of time, identify what the problems were, get it fixed up. By the time we order the package, which fingers crossed have always been before the listing active date, then the package came through clean.
Okay,
We
yeah.
had that pre-inspection.
Yeah, so the sellers, in Ron's case, the sellers paid for an inspection ahead of time, which in most HOAs, there also is like an a la carte service that, so like you can order different things, and inspections is one of them that can be paid for additionally. So like if the HOA packet's $150, you can order an inspection, or $225. The inspection with the HOA would be like $100 or $150. And
There were
then
costs with everyone, to your point.
yes, yeah. So they don't do it out of the goodness of their heart. But it is a nice thing when you order the HOA packet, because let's say it's $225 and they give you all the list of violations. Almost every HOA that I've encountered gives you 1 free reinspection. So then they come out and they reinspect for free, and then they give you that cure letter. So then you deliver the list of violations and the cure letter with it, and then you're good to go. All right, property maintenance and condition. So this paragraph can get a little confusing. It says, except as otherwise specified, the seller will deliver the property free and clear of trash and debris, broom clean, and substantially the same condition as of blank. Okay, so it doesn't say that you had to have like professional cleaners come in and scrub it, and like it said in the lease, right? This is just free and clear of trash and debris, broom clean, and then substantially the same condition as of the date of offer, the date of home inspection, or other. The seller will have utilities in service through settlement or as otherwise agreed. Okay. I have seen some agents, buyers check other and put date of settlement. So I want to explain what that means. If you put date of settlement, that means between the time that your client was last in the home, which may be when they showed the home, when you saw the home, because they waived home inspections, and the date of settlement, all of the appliances can break. The movers can put holes in the walls. They can scratch the wood floors. A tree can fall and hit the roof, and nothing has to be fixed. Date of settlement is only in very rare occasions something that is used for like a tear down, or something that's in very, very as-is condition and is going to be a complete rehab, and the buyer is an investor who is getting such a deal, they don't care. They're like, I'm doing all of this work anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, so everybody that's on this call should avoid using other. Okay. Date of offer and date of home inspection. This is one of those scenarios that it probably doesn't matter ultimately which you choose. I choose date of offer, and I know that there are some that, like Steve Gaskins, who likes date of home inspection, right? And I don't disagree with his reasons for date of home inspection because they make a lot of sense. With the date of home inspection, you have a copy of the home inspection, right? You have physical evidence of some of the items in the home and their condition, right? I have always gone with date of offer because date of offer is the closest time to when your client was in the home. So what their mind is on what they expect when they're making this offer, right? In a lot of cases, there are going to be photos from the listing that you have. There's probably brochures. There's evidence that you as the agent and the client have of the condition at that point. If you choose date of home inspection and siding falls off in a storm between the date of offer and the date of home inspection, and you don't negotiate for the siding to be put back on because the listing agent says, oh yeah, the seller's going to take care of that, it came off in the storm, no big deal, right? Or shingles came off the roof and you don't negotiate it in writing because they say that they've called their homeowner's insurance and then homeowner's insurance is going to take care of it. And then you get to settlement. And because you put date of home inspection and the shingles were off and it wasn't taken care of, the seller really doesn't have to comply with having the shingles put back on or the siding put back on, right? Because it is actually in substantially the same condition. Whereas date of offer, even if it wasn't in writing, they would still have to put it back on, right? I also believe that there's not too much time that goes by between date of offer and date of home inspection. So there's theories out there with some of the attorneys whose classes I attend that say, and again, they say there's really not, unless it's a scenario like I just described, right? There's not too much difference. If something's working at the date of offer and it's not working at the date of home inspection, sorry, if it's not working at date of offer, it is working at date of home inspection, and then it's not working again at closing, there's something weird, right? Like there's the condition of things between date of offer and date of home inspection is going to be virtually the same because there's not much time in between, right? You're getting ratified, you're getting in for that inspection because seller's only given us a couple of days, right? Get in and get out. So the condition is similar. And then you have your home inspection report that documents some of the items, right? It's not documenting everything, right? It's not documenting the condition of the walls or the floors or, you know, those types of things. So I like date of offer, and buyers are waiving inspections right now. And so I'm also seeing some where agents are marking waives the right or waives the opportunity to make it contingent on an inspection. And then they put that it's going to be the condition of the date of the home inspection. So then what condition, right? Do they have to deliver? So be careful on that. But if you put date of offer or date of home inspection and you're having a home inspection, I'm not going to have too much heartburn either way. But I do like date of offer. Now, down in the next section where you choose, is the contract contingent on home inspection or other inspections? Or the buyer waives the opportunity to make the contract contingent on home inspections? There is no such thing as a home inspection or any other inspection for informational purposes only. So we cannot mark the box that says buyer waives the opportunity to make this contract contingent on inspections and then put in additional terms, home inspection for informational purposes only. We either have an inspection with the appropriate document attached, or we don't have an inspection. Those are the choices. Now, I know that when we see an agent write home inspection for information only, the whole idea is that their client wants in to do an inspection and is telling the seller they're not going to void. We know that's what they're doing, but that's not what they're doing, right? That's not what they're doing. So what they would do to affect that correctly is they're going to check the box that it is contingent on a home inspection, because there are things that have to happen in order for that inspection to protect buyers and sellers and the agents. So check the box, and then when we get to the home inspection addendum, I will show everyone how to mark it up properly so that everyone is protected. But we don't ever say waives and then expect to take an inspector into a home. Yes.
So if we are the listing agent and we receive something that they check,
Mhm.
buyer waives, but then instead of that whole thing, you're going to talk about what we would do then when we receive something like that.
Yeah, it would be the same thing. You would counter.
That would be a counter.
It would be a counter, right? With exactly the way that you would present it if you were a buyer's agent, if your seller wants to allow them to do it.
Okay.
Now, that's the contract piece. The practical piece of it, if we're a buyer's agent, is let's have a conversation. Why do they need an inspection? If they're doing an inspection for information only, why can't they do the inspection on the day of closing? If they can't get out, what do they need it for? Well, inspections are not just for the condition of the home, it's to teach them about how to take care of the home and et cetera, okay? Again, why can't they do it on the day of closing, right? They can learn how to take care of the home on the day of closing. Why do they have to learn about it 3 weeks before they go to closing? Because they're gonna forget, right? What happens if they find something big? Then what? I mean,
Well, they just covered for the 3-day closing period for the review of the Vhda.
yeah, so if I'm a listing agent, I'm not gonna let that inspection happen until after the 3 days passes, right? For the HOA docs,
Possibly for a warranty.
maybe, could be for a home warranty to prove the condition. But if the seller has a home warranty, if they have the coverage, right, then they don't need it for the warranty, right? Because there's seller coverage is the, shows existing coverage ahead of time. So I don't know that we have an actual answer to the question, right, about why the buyer needs to have that inspection if they can't get out of the contract, if they can't do anything about the results ahead of time. Why are we going through this exercise of the inspection for information only? Let's just waive it if we're going to waive it, right? Like, do what we said we were going to do. We said we're going to waive it, so waive it. Choose one of the options and move on. I never think that a buyer should waive inspections. Even as a listing agent, when I'm talking to my sellers, I tell them that it's okay for the buyers to do inspections. Don't you want the buyers to know how to take care of your home once you sell it to them? Like, and it protects them in the event that there is something that comes up, right? They allowed the buyers to discover it. It's not like down the road where they're like, hey, you refused to let us do an inspection. And then everybody's, trying to prove, you know, this, right? I don't know. That's just my soapbox moment. Yes, ma'am.
And then wonder if before an offer is made, an agent wants to take their client and they bring along an inspector before.
Yeah.
They're not supposed to, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. So
I'm a little fuzzy on that.
pre-offer inspections are maybe an ask the broker topic. There should actually be documentation. There should be something signed allowing with the seller allowing buyers to bring an inspector through. There should be permission if it's going to be a full inspection. There's a document. If it's just these walk-in talks,
What do you say to that?
I don't like walk-in talks. Now, I will say that I don't know. Maybe there's more to walk-in talks than I know, so I will say that. But from my surface information about walk-in talks, they're just surface information. They're really not supposed to be touching anything when they go through the home. So how can they actually how can an inspector give information that is detailed enough, right? I think that it is a little bit of a false sense of security for buyers to have a walk and talk. It's more like here's the checklist of things that you should check if you get this house, right? And then do a full inspection later. Like if the buyer's coming into it with that type of thought process, like here are the things you should check, then I think it's okay. But I don't think it's a really good substitute for a full inspection to actually give an idea of condition on something.
But if you have a buyer who, for whatever reason, it checks their box for comfort, right? And they want to do it, they want to maybe consider waiving this. But they want someone to walk through the home before they consider waiving this. Can you do it?
Well, you have to have permission from the listing agent and the seller
Okay.
to have the walk and talk, and they need to truly understand the difference between a walk and talk and an inspection, and that the inspector who's doing the walk and talk is not allowed to touch anything. So they're not actually testing anything. They don't know, and they don't get a report. So they don't know what the true condition is of anything because they're not allowed. So it isn't actually, it's not actually a substitute for an inspection. All right, buyer acknowledges that except as otherwise specified in this contract, the property, including electrical, plumbing, existing appliances, heating, air conditioning, equipment, and fixtures shall convey in as is condition as of the date specified above. So my note here on that last paragraph in this section is that waiving a home inspection and then going to do a walkthrough and checking everything and deciding that that's your opportunity for home inspection to try to negotiate for things to be fixed, not okay. So as is condition means as is condition. Does not mean you get to change it at a later date and try to negotiate.
And this might be in that if you do use state of offer. If you don't, if your buyers decide not to do home inspection, that would be a good way to explain why we do the date of offer. Because it's as is conditioned from the date specified above, which would be date of offer. So if you went through refrigerator was working.
Yeah, exactly. So Sori was just talking about how date of offer and, you know, waiving the inspections, how we explain to our buyers what that means, right? So when you're going through the home, like if it's in the summertime, you can feel that the air conditioner works, right? If it's in wintertime, you can tell that the heat works. You know, you can open the refrigerator to see, you know, if it's cold in there, right? Like you're going to know that these things are in a general working condition. The buyer's remedy when they walk through a home at the walkthrough, if they're unhappy with the condition, which we'll talk about on that walkthrough sheet on Wednesday. The remedy is one of the choices on the walkthrough sheet, and not closing is not one of the choices. Okay, so I just want to be clear on that. They have to close, even if they're not happy with the condition of the property.
On this where it says buyer waives the opportunity to make the contract contingent on the inspection, are you able to add things in there like ensuring that the heat or air conditioning work? Like, can you make a caveat like that these things are functioning even though you're waiving your right to a full inspection?
So it's as is conditioned. So if the heat was working on the date of offer, like presumably you showed the home that day or the day before and it was working, and then that's automatically in there. We don't add language for that.
Okay.
Okay, it's 10:30. I'm gonna give you guys a break. We're only on page 5. But I'm gonna give you guys a few-minute break. How about 7 minutes? Come back at 10:37. And we'll see if we can get through some of these other paragraphs kind of quick. All right, everybody.
Expiration date says September 30. I remember you said that once I was under contract, we're covered, right? I don't have to make an additional.
Yep. All right, any burning questions before we move on? Am I killing you guys this morning?
No, it's good.
Is it? Okay.
It's good.
Okay.
Really good, yeah.
And I did warn for anybody that was here on Wednesday, I did warn you guys that we might go a little over
Yes,
12
you
o'clock
did.
today.
I'm going over forms, contracts, this is working. Most of my career has been dealing with contracts with people. It seems like every client I've ever had in the middle of my line of work, somebody's brought up a, what if this happens scenario, those clauses, you just don't always know how to respond to it. So going over this.
And I like it because I bring my forms that I've already,
Oh, yeah, to see if the notes are the same. Yeah.
I know.
Awesome.
Well, I usually, I forgot my blue highlighter because this version of Shannon's class, I'm doing my blue highlighter.
Oh, right.
And I forgot that one, so I have to go back and do highlights, so because it helps me remember, oh, yeah, I should be having this discussion.
All right. So, and just so you guys know, when we finish the entire series, I will post the new version of the class on the YouTube channel. So once we get through all 5 days, then I will post the new version up. So I think the last one that's up there is on from March, but it still should. I mean, it's virtually the same. I probably tell some of the same stories, some different ones. Some of my soapbox moments are the same and some are different, but the content is the same. I think though that the rental class, for those last two ones, I didn't do. So that will be different because I had NVAR Forms Committee meetings on those. So that one will be different. Okay. Utilities and major systems. We are saying here in the contract what the utilities are. Is the water public? Is it well? If it's well, is it private or community well? There are some communities that have community septic and community well. So we're just marking here so that it's properly disclosed to the buyer, really. And this is something that should be in the listing. Is the hot water, oil, gas, electric, other, propane, air conditioning, same thing, heating, same thing. If it's a heat pump, it's asking to market. If it's multiple zones, do we know? Sewage disposal, right? Septic, how many bedrooms is the septic perked for? We talked about this on the listing day, right? About the septic systems, right? Is it perked for the same number of bedrooms that the physical house is? Is it a community septic system? Is it an alternative septic system? Yes.
On the septic, I was gonna bring this up last week and I forgot about it. So in Stafford, for example, and like a lot of counties, I think in the area, they don't include sub-grade bedrooms for tax purposes. They will recognize you'll have sub-grade bedrooms built to code and all. And so in Stafford, for one of my listing clients, I had gotten the documentation from their health department that showed that the septic system was built to satisfy the quantity of living space or bedrooms based on what the builder had authorized. So they don't specify, at least in my case, did not specify a number of bedrooms, but said it was permitted or designed to accommodate the whole house as built by the builder. So, I mean, the answer is kind of yes, it is for all of that.
So, well, maybe. There should be additional documentation on that. So Ron said that the permit from the Stafford Health Department said that the property was perked for the number of bedrooms that the builder basically filed documentation on.
Yes, that's what the commissioner was telling me.
Yes.
But he didn't specify.
So in that case, there should be documentation on how many bedrooms the permits were filed for from the builder when they got the occupancy permit.
Yes.
And so then you could match that up. So the occupancy permit and those other documents, and generally speaking, it's not going to include the below grade bedrooms. It's going to be the above grade. When the builders file to get all of their permitting and everything, it's all above grade. They're filing their floor plans and everything like that because everything in a basement is optional. So that's kind of the rule of thumb. So that's interesting that they didn't actually put the number on there. They're like, hey, figure it out.
Yes. This was a question ourselves. I'm like,
Yeah. Right. You're like, yeah, it's fine for you. It's not fine for us.
well, exactly. It's two totally different jobs.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, and speaking of two totally different jobs, there are times where, and this is a little off topic, however, I'll return a document and say, hey, I need the copy of the trust documents, or I need the LLC or the power of attorney or whatever, right? And I'll get a response that says, oh, the title company already has that, right? Or the title company was fine with XYZ. The contract came in and it didn't have the seller's names right. But the title company's already processed everything all the way through and they never caught it. They did catch it. They just did on their end what they needed to do, right? It's two totally separate jobs, two totally separate jobs. The title company is responsible to get this transferred and on record, right? So if the money comes in and the deed is signed and it goes on record, they've done their jobs. They don't need a contract. They could have somebody sign on a napkin, right? They could just have two people come in and one has a suitcase full of cash and the other can prove that they legally own the property. And they're like, can we do this? Right? So they don't need the contract. So it's two totally separate jobs. Our job is that we are the gatekeepers of the promises in the contract. Okay, so we are helping our buyers and sellers to honor the promises that they have made in the contract to get to the closing table, because it's not likely that we're going to see somebody show up with a suitcase of cash and walk in with their buddy and say, hey, we want to exchange the property for this suitcase of cash. Okay, so that's our role, which is very different, right? So the title company, it's not that they didn't catch that the name was wrong, but because we're the gatekeepers of the promises, we want the promises to actually be enforceable. And that's why I want to review, and I try very hard to review within the 24 hours after you guys submit, which is the 48 hours from ratification, to make sure that if we have to fix something, we fix it. And it's why you might be frustrated with me when I return a document. You're like, for real? For real, right? Is it really that big of a deal? And the more that we do this, the more that we get used to it, everybody makes mistakes. I make mistakes, right? I can't tell you how nervous I am the once in a while that I'm actually representing a client and having to write an offer. Oh my goodness, am I nervous, right? Because it's very different for me to look at somebody else's document because I don't know what it's supposed to say. Like, I don't know what was in, you know, your mind when you're clicking through, right? I don't know what you meant to type. I just know what it's supposed to say, right? Just like you can't edit your own like English papers for college, right? Like somebody else has to edit it, right? So anyway, just a little note there on why sometimes it can get all the way through. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I needed something else. All right, conveyances. This section right here, personal property, this is almost identical to what we had on the listing agreement last week. This is reminding everyone, and buyers might not have seen this yet, right? The seller saw this language already, but the buyers may not have seen this already, so they're getting it for the first time, that the property includes the following personal property and fixtures, if existing, right? So they're getting window treatment hardware, they're getting blinds, they're getting the brackets, from the curtain rods. They're not getting the curtains. They're getting the brackets from the curtain rods. They're getting all surface brackets and hardware from TVs, right? But they're not getting the components. If there was a media system, right, that was on the wall, they're getting the brackets from it, but they're not actually getting the receivers. So anything that's physically attached to the walls, convey. So if your seller has all of their TVs mounted, right, like these here in the room, and your seller wants to take the mounts, have them take everything down and patch and paint before you go on the market. Now, if your buyer does not want the wall mounts or is nervous that there's going to be holes, negotiate here that they'll be taken down and patched and painted, okay? There's a little section right here that says other.
Real quick, just
Yes.
generally speaking, on the pool equipment cover, would the equipment also be like the nets to clean everything up? That would that be
Mhm.
considered equipment?
Yeah.
That wouldn't have to be put in there separately.
No,
Okay.
no. Okay, so this next section is check yes or no. Rule of thumb, if there is a box that says check yes or no, check yes or no. Don't just check yes. If there is something, check yes or check no. If there are multiple of something, then you put the number. If there is only one, you do not put one. That's an indication that I know you haven't read this part of the contract, if I see a one. And that will be your indication that a buyer's agent has not read the contract, if you see them put a one. Just a reminder, stover range is that one-piece unit that slides in between the countertops and cabinets. Cooktop is the piece that sits inside the countertop where you put your pot on to cook something. And then the wall ovens, of course, are in the wall. You don't have both. You have either a stover range or cooktop and wall ovens. You would not have both.
Hey, Shannon,
Yes, Mary.
what is the gas log?
Gas log is an insert into a fireplace. So it's gas log. Okay, so this gets used incorrectly all the time. Don't fight with an agent on the other side about it. It's not worth it. Gas log is actually an insert that can be removed from a fireplace. It's not what you mark if it's a gas fireplace, right? If it's just a normal gas fireplace, that's not the same thing. Agents don't understand what a gas log is. So if you have a gas fireplace, they don't understand. They're going to mark yes for gas log, but it's really something that's removable.
You mean if the fireplace is electric, so always gas log is not there, right?
So a gas log is something that they could actually take out of the fireplace and take with them. So it's something that's removable. It's not, most agents mark gas log if it's a gas fireplace. If it's like a built-in gas fireplace, but they're marking gas log. But it's not what it is. Yes.
I'm sorry, I have a question on that as well. So if you go in the house and you see that there's gas logs in the gas fireplace, shouldn't you mark that? Or are we checking to see if it's going to convey? Is that something that is an assumption or we need to check on it?
So it would actually have to be the real gas logs that are removable from inside the fireplace, not just a gas fireplace that you can't remove them.
Right.
So it would be like a wood burning fireplace that was converted to a gas fireplace, right? It wouldn't be something that like in a condo where they're built as gas fireplaces, right? It's two different things.
So I have a gas fireplace and we have gas logs. So, but that's my question is, if I was to sell my house, is it the assumption that the gas logs are gonna go with the gas fireplace or that,
It is, yes.
okay,
Yes.
okay.
Shannon,
Yes, Mary.
another thing regarding the ice maker. So there is outside ice maker part which bring water and crashed ice and cubes ice. And there is another refrigerators with inside ice maker means there is a drawer or to make ice inside, but there is no outside unit for the ice maker. I don't know if you are understand me or not, but ice maker means the outside part was water and things, or even the inside ice maker with a little drawer to make
Both.
ice.
Yeah, both.
Okay.
If water can be connected to the refrigerator and it
Mhm,
freezes into little ice cubes and drops them somewhere,
mhm.
it doesn't matter whether you get them from the door or you have to open the refrigerator to get them.
Okay.
As long as you don't have to go buy plastic ice trays to make your ice, that's what it means.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And where it says freezer, what that means is a separate standalone freezer, not freezer as part of your refrigerator unit.
Thank you.
You're welcome. In other items, if the seller has listed that like their riding lawnmower conveys, or the pool table that's in the basement, or the pool furniture, right, conveys, you would put that in other, and then you would make a note that it conveys at no additional value or no additional cost or something, so that the appraiser sees that there's no, that they don't have to give any value to it, that you're not like building into the sale price value of this additional personal property.
We can make that note here in this line.
Yes. Yeah, whatever else is listed, you would put that it conveys at no additional value.
Can I ask a question on that, Shannon?
Sure.
If you were, for example, my mother bought a house that was furnished in New York and the furniture conveyed at the price of $5,000. So are you able to put something like that in there, or does it have to be completely separate?
So that would be a separate bill of sale. So it doesn't convey included in the sale price, right? It's a separate bill of sale.
Right. Okay, so we wouldn't include that at all if they wanted to, as far as like other, we wouldn't put anything there, and it would be a separate transaction.
Right. If they're paying an
Okay.
additional cost, it would be separate. Yep.
So.
Okay, thank you.
What would be the, how would you say, if you didn't put that in there, that it conveys no additional cost, and the appraiser came in and used it as part of the appraisal?
So they won't use it as part of the appraisal. The lender is going to come back to you and say, do an addendum that says it conveys at no value. And so this is just saving the step. Yeah. Yeah. All right, fuel tanks. So this is where you would put like propane tanks. Do you have a propane tank buried in the backyard? And is it leased or is it owned? And if it's leased, who is it leased from? This says, unless otherwise agreed to in writing, any fuel that's in the tank becomes the buyer's fuel. So sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, it's December. You had to refill the tank. You refilled it, spent $1,000. You thought you were going to get some money credited back because you didn't really use any. You're not getting any money credited back because you didn't negotiate it ahead of time. Leased items. So this is the service contracts, like we talked about in the listing agreement. So if the home warranty is already on there, if there's alarm system, if there's any like sprinkler system in the yard, if there's a service contract on the sprinkler systems, pool service contract, any of that stuff would get listed here. IRS and Ferpta. We do have an addendum in our package on Ferpta. I think it's today, might be next week. Or on Wednesday, sorry. The seller is or is not a foreign person as defined for Ferpta. If you're the buyer's agent and the seller's optional listing information sheet doesn't exist, when you are calling to see what's important to the seller before you make your offer, double check before you fill this out, right? Don't leave it blank, because then they're going to leave it blank because they're not going to see it, because you're going to write such a clean offer that they can just ratify and there's no counter offers and everything is wonderful. And then this is blank and then you have to do an addendum and then it's a pain. So just ask, what should I check on the box for Ferpta? If the seller is a foreign person, the buyer, okay, the buyer, IRS is sneaky, may be required to withhold and pay to the IRS up to 15% of the sales price on behalf of the seller. Okay, remember, this is talking about foreign persons as identified by the IRS. So do they think they're going to be able to collect this money from the foreign person who doesn't live here or is not paying taxes here or whatever they think the risk is? No, but they think they can get it from the buyer because the buyer is buying property here. So they make it the buyer's responsibility, and it's a percentage of the sale price, not a percentage of the proceeds. So it's not like capital gains, right? Where it's a percentage of their profit. It's a percentage of the sale price that has to be withheld. So if you have a seller who falls under this category, have them talk to John McLaurin or David Robertson, because they'll go through the worksheet to see whether they qualify for any of the exemptions. Okay, and if they qualify for an exemption, then they're good. If they don't qualify for an exemption, they might not have enough of the proceeds for that 15%, right? There might not be enough profit in the sale, or they might not have enough cash. And the buyer has to know that ahead of time, because then the buyer might have to bring cash or not be able to buy the property, right? If it's an investor buying the property, then they might be willing to do it. So there's implications there. That's why this paragraph is important. Buyer representations. Buyer will or will not occupy the property as their principal residence. This is important for the loan purposes. Now, there's something in bold here that I want to point out. Unless specified in a written contingency, neither this contract nor financing is dependent or contingent on the sale and settlement or lease of another property. Okay, what does this mean? This means that you have a financing contingency, and in your lender letter, it doesn't say that you're contingent on the sale of a home in order to get your financing through. And you do not have the contingencies and clauses addendum that says that you are contingent on settlement of another home in order to get to closing. Okay. The buyer backs out of the home you are trying to sell. So now you don't have the proceeds, or your debt to income ratios are too high. Something goes wrong, and now you don't qualify for the loan you've applied for. And now you're going to get a denial letter and try to get out of this contract. You can't, because you don't have a contingency for the settlement of that other home. So it's very clear here that unless specified in a written contingency, so you can't use that financing contingency for your buyers right? That, well, we'll just get declined, right? For the financing. That's our fallback. We're just not going to tell them, right? So that we win the offer. Because the lender has to be clear when they decline an application on why it's declined.
And that if you haven't done this. then-
Yeah. And as a buyer's agent, you're going to be asking questions when you call to verify with the lender whether or not they're actually qualified, right? You're going to ask questions like, have you seen their bank statements and pay stubs and tax returns? Have you reviewed their documents? And, do they already have their down payment, or are they borrowing it, right? Like from a 401k, it's already in their bank. You're going to see on the lender letter, likely their current address, right? Because they usually put it on there. Google it. Talk to the listing agent or to the buyer's agent, what are they doing with their current home? Are they renting? Talk, right? Get them to talk, find out what's going on. So then do they have to sell? Do they not have to sell? If they tell you that they don't have to sell, then get it in writing from the loan officer. I also had one, I think a lot of you have heard this story before, that in the spring, I had a buyer submit an offer on my listing, and it was 3% down, 97% conventional loan. And that was a red flag to me, because conventional loans are generally 5% down. So I knew it was going to be VHDA. I knew it, because that's not a ratio, right? That I know. Now, you guys, over time, some of these red flags are going to come up to you. I come from lending. I've been doing this for a long time, right? So I talked to the loan officer, and I asked very specifically, I said, is the 3% down payment the buyer's own money? Or is she getting the grant from somewhere? Very specific question. And he told me it was her own money. And it was a big fat lie, and closing got delayed. And boy, did I call him out on that, because closing got delayed. And they lied about why closing got delayed. And I called them out on that too, because they used the same software that I used to use when I was in lending. I'm like, give me a break. And the buyer's agent, I thought, was going to hate me. And she actually thanked me afterwards, because I apologized to her, because I mommy voiced on them a little bit. Not her, I didn't mommy voice on her, but on the lender. And I apologized to her, and she was like, no, thank you. She actually said that, she's like, your agents are really lucky to have a broker that would, be able to stand up like you do and whatever. And it was actually very nice. But I was like, come on, I asked you the question because I just knew it. And because I knew it, I also had been able to tell my clients, right, that I'm pretty sure that it's a grant and it's not going to hurt anything, right? I'm pretty sure it's not her money and it's not going to hurt anything, but closing may be delayed a day or two because of how the process works with VHDA. And so they were fine, right? They weren't contingent on closing on another home. And so I was able to set the expectations. And so just a story to tell you guys that you're going to ask questions, you're going to talk, you're going to find out. But if they have to sell a home, make sure your buyer understands too that you're writing this offer. And if they're contingent on selling another home, it doesn't matter what the loan officer tells you. Okay. It also doesn't matter what the loan officer tells you or your client about whether or not their loan is so solid you can waive financing. I love our loan officers that exist in this world, but sometimes I want to wring their necks because it doesn't matter whether their loan is so solid today. You know what my question is for them? My question is for them. If they lose their job a week before closing, are you still going to fund their loan? Are they that solid that if they lose their job, are you still going to fund their loan? See what they say. Because that might be a difference maker for your buyer on whether or not they want to waive their contingency. And if they still want to waive their contingency, knowing that their lender is not going to still fund their loan when they can't verify their employment a couple of days before closing, at least you've done your job, right? But it's a frustrating thing. It's a frustrating thing. Okay. Smoke detectors. Smoke detectors are something that's not negotiable. I see them come up on home inspection items, right? Replace smoke detectors. The seller has to deliver the property with smoke detectors installed and functioning in accordance with the laws and regulations of Virginia. Okay, so we're recording this and all of you can mark the moment that I don't know what the smoke detector laws and regulations are in Virginia, other than they have to be working. And I know that that landlords have to check them, right, before new tenants move in. So make sure that in the jurisdiction that the home is in, right, like each county could have additional overlays. So just go online and check. And your local fire departments, I'm sure would help you out with this. Go make friends. Tell them you have a listing coming up, right? Could be a little lead gen activity. Tell them you have a listing coming and you want to make sure that you're complying with the local regulations. Could they tell you what those are? And I bet they're going to go in their little back room and hand you some smoke detectors, right? Target lead-based paint housing. Okay. Who remembers what's the date for lead-based paint?
78.
Prior to 78?
78 or prior.
Before 1978.
Before 1978, so December 31st of 77, right? Good job. So there is an addendum that goes with this. If they were constructed prior to 1978, this you would grab from the listing side with the Depor disclosure. Even if it was built after December 31st, 1977, so you're marking, you know, was not, still check the box that says buyer does waive. I don't like boxes being unchecked. I think once in my entire career have I seen a buyer try to do a risk assessment for the presence of lead-based paint. You know, so when you're acknowledging that it was built prior to 78, you're still going to mark on here that they're going to, if they're waiving their right to do an inspection for lead-based paint. Okay, so don't forget that second box. Wood destroying insect inspection. Okay, there are three choices. There's not going to be one. The buyer will do it at the buyer's expense. The seller will do it at the seller's expense and furnish the report. Okay, how does this work? Well, conventional financing, generally the lender doesn't care about the termite inspection. So you can mark no. If you're a buyer's agent, just double check with the lender, but usually conventional financing, they don't require it. Fire at buyer's expense is allowed on conventional and FHA. If there is visible evidence of live wood destroying insects, the seller must remediate, no matter who does the inspection. The seller, at seller's expense, must provide the report on VA financing transactions. The buyer is not allowed to pay the $35 to $50 to provide their own termite inspection report. Okay, This is not an earth-shattering expense for a seller. Set the expectation up front. It's not a make or break for your seller, okay? In the contingency addendums for FHA, VA, and USDA, it clarifies the areas that have to be included in the inspections. So make sure that when you're ordering the inspections, that you are indicating what type of financing it is. Okay, so like I use Pest Now, right? It's super easy, go online, order the inspection, and you can put comments, you can put notes, right? So put a note that it's VA financing or FHA financing, so then they know to include. And sometimes I'll even put, include the outbuildings, include the shed, include the fence, right? So that the report is complete for when you turn it in.
Shannon?
Yes, Mary.
So if you put for Pest Now, you are indicating the places for Pest Now, or you put only the type of financing and they will recognize the places they have to inspect?
They know.
They know, okay.
They know. They do. But other companies might not. Pest Now.
I'm doing always with Pest Now like you.
Yeah, they know.
But I have another question, please. If they find evidence of dead termite in the property, so what is the scenario then?
Well, the contingency does not require the seller to do anything about dead termites.
Yeah, but if there is anything like spray or anything the seller maybe put to like make this termite dead in the time of inspection, in my opinion, I feel worried. If there is even a dead termite. This means that there is a termite, right?
So on the inspection report from the company, they're going to be able to indicate whether there's previous treatment. They can tell if there's previous treatment. They're also going to be able to tell if they see dead termites, whether it was real treatment that killed them, right, from some other company. So sometimes sellers will have their own inspections done for various things and then have their own treatment done, right? So maybe they had another reputable company come out and treat, and then they're dead, right?
So we don't have the right to ask for any treatment then?
Correct. You can certainly ask the sellers, have you had previous treatment?
Okay. And by the way, if the termite found around the trees in front of the house, the seller has to send the company as well, right? If there is no termite inside the house, but there is termite around the bushes and the trees in front of the house.
So it says right here, excluding fences or shrubs, not abutting garage or dwelling. So as long as it's not touching the home.
Okay, but okay.
Okay.
If there is termite on the trees, so the seller cannot do anything.
Correct.
Okay.
Now the buyer certainly can, right?
Yes,
Once the
of
buyer closes, the buyer can have treatment.
Actually, the seller, one of my sales, the seller was so kind. We only found termite on the tree in front of the house, and he sent the company, and they treated, and they treat also the house, although there is no termite in the house, but they treated the house as well.
It's very nice. And a lot of times you'll find sellers that are like that, because if they are aware that there's something like that could cause damage to their home while they still own it, they'll treat it. So that's not uncommon.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you, Shannon.
You're welcome. damage or loss. The risk of damage or loss to the property by fire, acts of God, or other casualty remains with the seller until the execution and delivery of the deed of conveyance to buyer at settlement. Okay, so there's this time period in Virginia from when you settle, right, when you're signing, to when it goes on record. I always suggest that the sellers keep insurance on the home until the property has funded. Okay, once they receive their money, then they can call and cancel their homeowner's insurance. So the buyer is going to have homeowner's insurance on the home from the date of settlement, and the seller is going to keep their homeowner's insurance on until they get their money in their bank, because that means that the deed's been recorded and everything's been funded. Okay, they're not going to cancel that on the date of closing, because there are very rare occasions that something happens and the loan doesn't fund and the closing is unwound and the seller actually still owns the home even after they've signed. Okay, very rare occasions. So don't let that scare you. Just let them keep it. Title paragraph. This is a long paragraph. It's an important paragraph. It highlights a few different things for you guys to know that won't impact you on a regular basis. However, when they do, it's good to know. The title report and survey, if required, will be ordered promptly, and if not available on settlement date, then settlement may be delayed for up to 10 business days to obtain the title report and survey, after which this contract, at the option of the seller, may be terminated and deposit will be refunded in full to the buyer according to the terms of the deposit paragraph. Okay, what does that mean? That means that if the title report and survey have not been received by settlement date, there's this automatic extension period for up to 10 days to get that information, because they can't close if they don't know if title's clear, right? If we can't get clear title and issue title insurance and all of those things, if 10 days has passed, 10 business days, and we still don't have it, the seller can say, I can't wait any longer, and we're voiding the contract, and the buyer gets their money back, okay? But it's this automatic extension period if the title and survey are delayed.
Is it an automatic termination? So it's the option, because
It's the option.
Why would the seller say, the seller obviously wants to sell it at this point, right? They want it. So what's the buyer's option if they can't get title?
In that section, there isn't at that point. Now the buyer has other options based on some other things that could come up further on based on why title's delayed, or if they have, if there's other things going on.
So if a seller can't, like, how long does the seller have to like bring a marketable title?
Well, this right here isn't about marketable title. It's about being able to obtain the title report and survey. And there's an example about survey. Certain counties, smaller counties or more rural counties, it's harder to get surveys, and sometimes surveys are required for title insurance, and sometimes for a specific transaction, surveys are required based on like verifying lot lines, right? And encroachments and things like that. So there's a situation that happened where there was an encroachment on another lot, that was owned by a family member of the seller. And the county is who did the surveys. And they wanted to redraw the lot lines so that the neighbor, right, the family member was willing to redraw the lot lines so that the encroachment was in the seller's lot and not on their lot. But the county needed to do the survey and then go through the paperwork to redraw the lot lines. And the buyer entered into the contract with an awareness of this issue. And the time came for settlement and the survey hadn't been done yet. And the seller ended, there was also something in here that said that the earnest money deposit would be non-refundable, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes because that's not enforceable. The 10 days comes and goes and still not getting anywhere with the county on getting the survey. And the buyer is pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's like, we have to close now. Like, I want to buy the property, we have to close now. And the seller's like, I can't deliver you clear and clean title because of this encroachment. It's on somebody else's lot. We need to clean this up, right? Seller delivers the notice to void and says, look, we need to get this cleaned up, right? And then we'll be happy to sell it to you. But if we can't get in a settlement extension with you, if you're not going to agree to extend, then we're just going to kill the deal. And we're giving you your earnest money deposit back. And we'll get this worked out. But the buyer wasn't happy. But that's what we had to do here, right? Because the seller couldn't deliver the property because of the encroachment and needed to be able to redraw the lot lines. So there are cases where it does happen and the buyer didn't want to let the property go. The buyer was like, I'm staying and I want you to go to closing and sign the papers, right? So there are extreme circumstances. And on the flip side, right, if the buyer doesn't want to be held up and is like, I need a house, right? And you can't deliver title, I need to be able to go somewhere else, then what can they do? Well, the next paragraph says that the seller will convey title, which is good, marketable, and insurable by a licensed title insurance company with no additional risk premium. So in a case where the title is not good and marketable and insurable by the licensed title insurance company with no additional risk premium, the buyer, at buyer's option, can declare the contract void or pursue all available legal and equitable remedies. So they can sue the seller. Nothing prohibits the parties from agreeing to extend settlement, right? So there could be a settlement extension that the seller has to pay buyer's costs, right? For having to extend, put them, up in an extended stay because they need a place to live. Like there's things that can be agreed to there. But at that point, if title comes back or they can't get title, so they can't convey the good and marketable insurable title, then the buyer can void at that point. Seller will convey property by general warranty deed. That's the traditional deed that we convey. Foreclosures, right? REOs are usually a special warranty deed. And there's an addendum to those contracts or a special contract in itself that will clarify that. And the different types of deeds have to do with how they can make promises based on the chain of title and whether there's issues in ownership, right? They can only say that they know that there aren't any liens or any issues with title based on the time that they've owned the property. That's why the foreclosures are different. All right, seller will sign any affidavits, lien waivers, tax certifications, and other documents that could be required by the lender, title insurance company, settlement agent, or government authority, and authorizes the settlement agent to obtain payoff or assumption information from existing lenders. We don't do many assumption of loans these days because the rates are so low. Unless otherwise agreed to in writing, the seller will pay any special assessments and will comply with all orders or notices of violations of any county or local authority, condo unit owners association, homeowners or property association, or actions in any court on account thereof against or affecting property on settlement date. Broker is hereby expressly released from all liability for damages by reason of any defect in the title. Okay. So, seller will comply with all orders or notices of violation from HOAs and condo associations. Here is your pre-printed language for your sellers that says you got to deal with the violations, that it is not optional. So we do not put an addendum in place that lists that our buyer wants everything fixed and give the seller the option to say no, and then it becomes a thing. It's just pre-printed. They have agreed to it. And we are going to help them honor what they agreed to. The piece that gives the buyer the right to void, in the opinion of most attorneys, is that this affects title, right? Because HOAs can put liens on properties. And so we go back 2 paragraphs before where it says that if the title is not good and marketable, right? So it has to be free of clouds on title, then the buyer can declare the contract void. Wait, my phone is ringing off the hook. All these people should be in class with us. Good gravy.
In other words, the buyer, if the seller says, I'm just not gonna fix it, the buyer can void.
That's right. The buyer can,
Anytime, at any time, all the way up till, because what if
on settlement date.
on settlement?
Yeah.
Can void up to settlement.
Well, they can't void before because the seller has to have an opportunity to get that cure letter up to, on settlement date. Now the buyer can go to closing and then pursue the seller after closing because the statute, right, says that the seller is not relieved of their obligations for when they owned the property. So the buyer can still pursue the seller. You can also escrow money if the lender will allow it for the seller to take care of things. So we run into situations in the winter where the HOAs in their infinite wisdom will say, home needs to be power washed. Okay, right? We're gonna get out there in the middle of January and power wash the siding. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Or that something needs to be painted. Well, nobody's painting in the middle of January. So sometimes you can get an escrow that's approved by the lender to take care, for the seller to take care of those violations. The other thinking outside the box thing is to have the buyer hire a vendor of their choosing. So someone they trust, and then the seller prepays it. Now it's the buyer's risk, right? That it's prepaid and then the vendor doesn't do it. But if the buyer's choosing who the vendor is, then the likelihood that it's somebody that they know and trust, so it gets done, is there. All right, notice of possible filing of mechanics liens. Contractors have up to 90 days from, to file the mechanics lien. So the sellers are signing an affidavit at closing saying that they have paid for everything that's been done. But this is just a notice that something could be filed after settlement. All right, possession. Unless otherwise agreed to in writing between the seller and buyer, seller will give possession of the property at settlement, including delivery of keys, key fobs, codes, digital keys, if any. If seller fails to do so and occupies property beyond settlement, seller will be a tenant at sufferance and buyer and waives all notices to quit as provided by law. So that's fancy language for like, they're not really a tenant. They don't get pay or quit notices. You know, the buyer can go straight to the courts to file for eviction. Yes, ma'am.
I have not necessarily now, because I don't want to slow this down, but since we have a lot of these post-settlement occupancy agreements,
Yeah,
I would love to talk about that at some point.
yep, we have, I don't know if that's today or Wednesday, but that's one of the
Oh,
documents.
that
in
is
our-
one of the documents, okay.
It is, yeah, and post-settlement occupancy is the unless otherwise agreed to in writing. So that's that first sentence is what that alludes to. Yep. All right, fees. This is just talking about certain fees that are going to be on the settlement statement, right? Deed prep, seller pays seller's portion of that. Seller has legal fees to pay, buyer has certain fees to pay for closing as well. There's also reasonable and customary, whatever that is, for the jurisdiction in which the property is located, like grantor's tax, regional congestion relief fee, and Whda tax for Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William counties. Buyer shall pay recording charges for the deed and any purchase money trusts. So buyer pays coming and going. All right, broker's fees. Seller instructs the settlement agent to pay the broker's compensation at settlement and takes it out of their proceeds, right? And then pays us directly. Adjustments. Okay, so adjustments, this talks about how like property taxes, sometimes there's water and sewer charges, HOA dues that are paid upfront by the seller for the whole month, but part of the month is really the responsibility of the buyer. So there will be adjustments where the buyer has to pay back the seller for the portion that they prepaid. There's also a situation with property taxes where seller has a mortgage, they're paying into their escrow account every month, and they still have to pay it again at closing and then get the money back from the escrow account, right? So if somebody's going to closing today on the 20th, they've paid in to their escrow account already for July and August, and they've made their September mortgage payment, so they've paid September. So they have to pay that again at closing, and then they're going to get that back from their escrow account plus the approximately 2 months of reserves that's sitting in there. Attorney's fees, this is the same as buyer agreement, listing agreement, tenant and landlord agreements. Whoever the breaching party is, excuse me, if it goes to court or attorneys, whoever they see is the winner gets their attorney fees paid by the loser. And it's just how it is. So that's why we're here, to make sure nobody breaches any contract. Everybody does what they say they were going to, and we all get to closing and everybody's happy, right? Okay, performance. Performance is considered delivery of the required funds and executed documents to the settlement agent. Okay, funds. Basically funds from the buyer and the signed deed from the seller, right? Obviously, there's more to it than that, but that's the basic gist of it. And then funds from the transaction at settlement are used to pay off existing liens and encumbrances as required by the current lien holders. Default. Okay, so There is a difference between default and breach of a contract term. And I can do a whole class just on this topic. Breach of a contract term does not give either party the right to not go to closing, right? Default happens when some party doesn't go to closing and they haven't had a mutual release of the contract or properly delivered notice to void the contract. So breach of a contract term does not kill the deal, right? It means that a party may be able to pursue remedies in court, financially or otherwise. But the contract itself is still in full force and effect. And everybody needs to continue to do the rest of the things they said they were going to do. Okay, an example of breach of a contract term that does not kill the deal would be the buyer failing to deliver their earnest money deposit on time. Okay, so they said they were going to deliver their earnest money deposit in 5 days after ratification. And it's day 7 and they haven't delivered it. Well, the contract's not dead. The contract's still in full force and effect. We've got to get the earnest money deposit delivered. Okay, so the buyer breached the contract term. Default is when somebody doesn't show up for closing. Now, what I will say is that this happens now, or a party attempts to do this now more often than I would like. If you think this is going to happen, it works better if you let me know ahead of time and not after the closing date. My magic wand has more powers prior to closing than after the closing date has passed. Some clients just are unreasonable and irrational, and there's nothing we can do. And that's very rare. However, it is happening more often than it used to. If a party is not going to show up for closing, the other party needs to if they want to pursue something, right? So 2 wrongs don't make a right. So if you're on the seller side and the buyer is like, I'm not coming to closing, right? And tried to, like, had no financing contingency and got declined for financing or whatever, and your seller wants to pursue that, right? Or keep their EMD or something, and it's a day before closing, your seller needs to go and sign their papers, right? So they've performed. The property needs to be empty. They need to be able to deliver the property. Same if the seller is not going to perform, right? The buyer needs to do everything they can. They need to show up for closing. It's a headache, but they still have to perform. The earnest money deposit can be used as liquidated damages, okay? So it's not meant to be punitive. It's not meant to be a penalty to the buyer for whatever the situation is, all right? So here's an example. Earnest money deposits $25,000. Offer price was $500,000. Seller took the offer of $500,000 from buyer 1, no financing contingency. A week before closing, buyer gets declined, can't get to closing. Like, okay, that's fine. Let it ride. Seller performs, buyer does not. Day after closing, home goes back on the market, okay? Seller is not ready to do anything with the earnest money deposit, right? Buyer wants their deposit back. They're like, we got declined. We want our deposit back, right? I know, you guys are like, you didn't read the contract, right? So buyer has a couple of options. Buyer can offer the earnest money deposit and see if the seller takes it. Because if the seller takes it, then the seller has waived their right to sue the buyer for any additional damages that they might incur. Okay, so that's one option. Option two is they can offer them part of it, right? They can say, hey, can we split it? Right, maybe that'll work. Option three is that the seller's like, hey, let's just wait and see what happens, right? So in this scenario, house goes back on the market, offer comes in at $450. That was the original list price. Offers at $450, goes to closing. So now seller wants $50,000. Maybe they actually had more damages because maybe it took 60 days to go to close, right? And so there's additional, right? But so it's not just the earnest money deposit, right? Now they want more. Now they can sue the buyer and possibly get more money. Maybe the buyer doesn't have more money, right? So maybe they're not going to get more money. Who knows? Scenario two is that the home goes under contract for $550. So now the seller hasn't suffered any damages. So what do you think I'm going to suggest our seller does at that point after it closes? Return the EMD, sign the release, and return the EMD. Because it's not meant to be punitive. It's meant to offset the damages, the loss, right? Now, let's say our buyer only has like a $2,000 or $5,000 earnest money, and they waived their contingency. They were taking a risk. They lost out, right? Got declined, and now they want out of the contract, right? What do you think my suggestion is going to be?
Offer to the seller for to be done.
Yeah, offer their EMD to the seller to release them.
But if they don't, it's gonna cost them.
Right. The seller can decline. The seller can say, no, I'm not going to take your EMD. But it's, I mean, if it's 25,000, I might say, let's wait and see based on what the market's doing, right? If I think the market's going down, I'm going to say $25,000, go consult your attorney, right? But if it's 5,000, it's a conversation we're going to have, right? That says they can sue you. And we have that purchaser's acknowledgement of potential adverse consequences document signed, right? So we can have that conversation too, right? Like we talked about this. It's not an I told you so moment. However, that's part of the conversation is, so what happens if you're declined, right? Well, this is what we're going to do. This is limiting your risk moving forward, is offer them your earnest money deposit, and we're all going to cross our fingers and toes and hope that they sign it, because they cannot come after you for anything else if they take your earnest money, because they have to sign the release document, which is in our Wednesday packet. That I know for sure, because those are post-ratification documents. Okay. Questions about that? Oh, the one last thing is that the deposit never gets released from an escrow account until one of three things happens. Closing, right? So that's one. Second thing is everybody agrees, all the parties in the contract agree to the disposition of the deposit, or there's a court order. One of those three things happens. There really is a fourth thing, but I'm not going to get into it with you guys. So that's it. Okay, those three things. Closing, everybody signs the release, agreeing to where it goes, or a court order. Okay, other disclosures is section 29. So this is just talking about how buyer and seller should carefully read this contract. Yeah, right. And make sure that they accurately express their respective understanding as to the intentions and agreements. The broker can counsel on real estate matters only. And if legal advice is desired by either party, they should be advised to seek legal counsel. Okay, so remember that if both sides are using universal title, there can be no legal advice given by our attorneys at universal title. They can read them what the contract says. They can't give any legal advice, okay? It's just like what happens if we have designated agency within the market centers and there could be a challenge with your clients in a transaction. I can't give advice. I can reiterate what the contract says to the parties, okay? If there are two separate title companies, then essentially that's, they're not being retained, right? They're not a full retainer, but there's representation for either side, and so that's different, okay? All right, property condition. This is talking about there are various inspection services and insurance programs and lots of ways to figure out what the condition is of the property, and it's up to the buyer to speak up if they want to do inspections, and that the broker is not advising about certain issues, right? We're not experts in water quality, right? We're not experts in zoning. We're not experts in polybutylene pipes. So we can certainly help them to get additional information, but we're not advising on that. Legal requirements, all contracts for the sale of real estate must be in writing to be enforceable. This is very hard. This is very hard when you hear from an agent, a listing agent, and says, your buyer won, we're just waiting on signatures. We'll send it back to you. And then somebody else sends an offer in that beats yours. And then listing agent calls and says, I'm sorry. You're like, what the? But it's not enforceable until it's in writing. Okay, same thing happens if you're countering, right? And somebody swoops in. I mean, it can work to your advantage too. It's very hard. So everything has to be in writing. You know, the example we talked about with the siding flying off the house, and, you know, if it's not in writing, it's not enforceable. All right, mortgage rates and associated charges with financial institutions, that's on the mortgage companies. It's not up to us. The broker says buyer and seller acknowledge that broker is being retained solely as a real estate agent, not the attorney, tax advisor, lender, appraiser, surveyor, structural engineer, molder, air quality inspector, yada, 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 psychologist, all of these other things, Uber driver that we talked about last week. Property taxes. Alert to the buyer, your property tax bill could substantially increase following settlement. Okay. Let's say the square footage on the tax record is wrong, and it's less than what it actually is. This has been benefiting the seller for a long time. And if you want to get it fixed, buyer wants to get it fixed after they go to closing, their property tax bill probably will increase, right? It's going to benefit them in the long run because when they go to sell the property later, right? Just a note on that. Also, the tax bills change every year, right? It's all about how much the counties and jurisdictions want to collect. They have a budget and then they divide it amongst all of the homeowners. Property insurance, it's a requirement of the lender in order to secure financing. Okay, title insurance. Buyer, at the buyer's expense, may purchase owner's title insurance. Okay, the lender requires title insurance. This is not optional. The lender requires lender title insurance. It protects the lender's interest in the home, in the chain of title. It does not protect the buyer's interest in the chain of title or clouds on title or any issues that may come up. So buyers, don't be stingy. Get title insurance. The lender requires that you're paying for it for the lender. Why not pay for it for yourself? And again, it's not a problem until it's a problem, right? So you're not gonna not have homeowners insurance because you're not likely to have your house burned down from a fire, right? You're going to have homeowners insurance. So make sure your buyers understand that, that the title insurance is super important. And there are things that you couldn't possibly dream of that could come up. Many of you know my story about my seller who went to sell and they found out that the sellers bought from what they thought were a husband and wife, but really they bought from a husband and a wife and the wife's brother. The wife's brother didn't actually sign anything when my clients bought the home. So they really didn't actually own the home. And the husband and wife that they bought from were now divorced. So luckily, the title company at the time was able to, well, the buyers, title companies who figured this out, they wanted nothing to do with it. They wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole. And so our seller's title company was like, we'll take care of it. They tracked down husband, ex-wife, ex-brother-in-law, everybody signed, re-recorded the deed, everything was fine. If somebody was deceased, or if they couldn't track somebody down, the title insurance policy is what they would have had to invoke so that they could sell the property. So it's not a problem until it's a problem. Assignability, the contract may not be assigned without written consent of buyer and seller. That means it's usually done in like wholesaling and, you know, investors and things like that. When you just have regular buyers and sellers, you're not going to try to give one party to another to be responsible. Okay, definitions. Date of ratification means the date of delivery of final acceptance in writing by buyer and seller of all terms. Okay. Date of ratification is not the date that, or the moment, the time of ratification is not when the last person signs or initials. It's when it's delivered back. Okay, so I'm having my client initial the last changes. Technically, I do not put the ratification date on. I send it back to the other side. And when they get it, they put the ratification date on, right? So in practice, how does this really work? Well, in practice, I'm putting the initials on as the last person. I'm calling the agent on the other side and saying, hey, I'm getting ready to send this back to you. Do you want me to put the ratification date on? They say, yes, please. I put the ratification date on, I send it, and I make sure they got it. And I say, double check and make sure everything is good. Just because the ratification date's on there does not mean it's a ratified contract, okay? Same thing, if you receive from someone else the final version and they put the ratification date on there, don't take it for granted. I cannot tell you how many contracts I review in a week that are not actually ratified contracts because something is missing. Some initials, something are missing. So double check it. Make sure that it's actually complete and that it's ratified. So if there's something substantial that is missing, an initial or a signature or something, what I will do, because you shouldn't be changing a document that's ratified, right? And I might not have gotten the document for a week. I will say, hey, do a sales contract addendum confirming whatever the item is that the initials were missed on. So I'll see this on name changes where buyer's agent sends contract and the name is spelled wrong, right? So listing agent corrects the name, has their client's initial the change, and then buyer's agent doesn't actually initial the change. And then everybody decides it's ratified, or a settlement dates changed, or a conveyance is changed or something, right? And so these are like substantial things. So I'll say, do a sales contract addendum confirming whatever the item is and confirm the ratification date. Because you all would be operating, right? Buyer and seller, listing agent, buyer agent would be operating off of a specific ratification date. Appraisal means the appraised written valuation of the property, generally from the lender, but doesn't always have to be. Days or calendar days. All time is Eastern time zone. For the purpose of time periods, 9 p.m. ends the day, okay? The day of delivery is always day 0. And then the end of the day is 9 p.m. This does not apply to HOA docs or condo docs. Remember, they're special. That paragraph gets its own rules. Notices are unilateral communication. Okay, so notices are something that's not negotiable, right? It's just one party telling the other party something. If in the contract somewhere it says by delivery of written notice, you're going to see the word notice in most cases with a capital N. Sometimes it won't be. So it says here in H that it could be in lowercase. But in most cases, it's going to be notice with a capital N, and that's your hint to use the notice document, the NVAR notice document, or a notice that is specific to that contingency, right? And the contingency will usually tell you, right? Like the appraisal contingency notice. All right, seller subsidy is a payment from seller towards buyer's charges. Miscellaneous, the contract may be signed in one or more counterparts, each deemed to be an original. Okay, so in a very rare circumstance, it generally doesn't happen with a contract, but it might happen with an addendum where it's the same version of the addendum, but a seller is taken, an original to sign, and then the buyer signs, and they're not on the same document, but it's the same information. It's considered one document, okay? Void, if this contract becomes void and of no further force and effect without default by either party, both parties will immediately execute a release, directing the deposit be refunded in full to the buyer, okay? So sellers can't sit on the release because they're upset that the buyer voided. It's pre-printed language, so sorry, I understand you're mad, you're upset, your feelings are hurt, sign the release, and move on. Home warranty, will there be a home warranty? Yes or no? Time is of the essence. Means the dates and timeframes agreed to by the parties must be met. That's part of why we are here, okay? Failure to meet dates or timeframes will result in waiver of contractual rights or will be default under the terms of the contract, right? So if you don't go to closing on time, you could be in default. This next paragraph, I'm not even gonna go over, it's not relevant and it's gonna be removed because it doesn't apply anymore. Real estate license sale, licensed parties. So if there is a licensed party, active or inactive in any jurisdiction, Virginia, Maryland, DC, California, Wyoming, Alaska, it needs to be marked here if you're related to a party or if you are the party. The agreement will be binding upon the parties and each of their respective heirs, executors, administrators, successors, and permitted assigns. And the contract is governed by the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Okay, here is where you would mark what addendums are attached to the contract. So when I'm looking in command for a fully ratified contract, what I'm looking for are these 13 pages plus all of the items that are marked here with the yes box checked. So if you have home inspection and radon contingency checked yes, that should go in the same PDF as these 13 pages. If you have financing contingency, that document's going to go there. Contingencies and clauses addendum, if there's like a home sale contingency or home of choice contingency, that would go here. Post-settlement occupancy, that would go here. Anything that you have that's with the ratified contract goes here. If you have an escalation addendum, that would go here. Disclosure of sale price to appraiser. This is authorizing if an appraiser calls, you're allowed to disclose the ratified sale price. Other terms, 41, don't write other terms. Just don't do it. It's the opposite of the Nike slogan. Just don't do it. If you feel like you really need to do it, call me. If it's worth the phone call to me, then you must really, really, really want to do it. Send me an email if you think there's a reason for the other terms, right? Putting in here that the offer expires at a specific time if not responded to does not go in other terms. It actually doesn't go anywhere because it's not enforceable. Because if it's not responded to or agreed to, then nothing you wrote on this offer matters because it hasn't been signed by all the parties, right? So that doesn't go here. I actually don't want the appraisal gap guarantee here anymore.
Okay, I was gonna.
I actually want you guys to put that on a separate addendum now. Anything that I've already agreed to for you guys to write, like the buyer will pay the up to a certain amount towards the seller's closing costs. Any of those things that we're going to put on a separate addendum. Okay, so just don't do it. Here's that ratification date place, and then listing brokerage information and cooperating brokerage information. You have access to all of this information, even if the listing agent does not provide you with that optional buyer, offer information sheet. You can find all of this information by using Bright MLS and Depor. So you have the information for yourself and you have the information for the listing side, I promise. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for 1 minute, and I want to, because I don't want to scroll through and make your heads hurt. So I want to look at something before I decide how much further we're going to go on today. I really don't. We went through a lot. We talked about a lot, and I really don't want to do too much more. Well, a lot of it's repetitive because it's the financing contingency addendums. And I think, and we're going to be able to knock those out quickly. Okay, we're just going to knock out one more document, and that's going to be the home inspection contingency addendum. And then you guys are going to be done. So 5 more minutes, and then you're out of here. Okay, home inspection and radon contingency addendum. All right, I don't need to explain the tab. You guys know how to fill in names and addresses by now. There are 2 choices with our home inspection contingency. It is the right to negotiate or void, and then the right to void only. Those are the 2 options that we have, okay? The inspection period, the contract is contingent until 9 p.m. blank days after ratification. All right, and this means that the buyer has blank number of days to get a licensed professional insured inspector to come in and do the home inspection and deliver their wish list to the listing side with the repairs that they want to have done, okay? If they decide it's too much and they don't want repairs done, then they deliver the notice to void instead of the wish list, and it has to be done in those blank number of days. So 10 or less. In this market, it's like 5 or 7, right, is the number of days that we're seeing. The seller has to have the utilities in service, and if the utilities are not in service, that second blank in the top paragraph is an automatic extension of the contingency period. Okay, usually I put 5, right, to give time to reschedule the inspector. Now, earlier in the contract, it said that the seller is going to keep the utilities on, so this shouldn't happen. But if it does, then the utilities have to be put back on. And then after the seller says that the utilities are back on, then you have 5 days or however many days you put in that blank to do the inspection. Now, when you are delivering either the wish list or the copy of the report, or I'm sorry, the notice voiding the contract, you also have to deliver an entire copy of the report that you got from the inspector, okay? If the buyer is voiding, include with the notice to void and the report, the release that gives your buyer the money back, okay? And that's on Wednesday, the notice to void and the release document. We'll go over how to fill those out. If the buyer fails to obtain an inspection or deliver the report to the seller in that time frame, with, you know, the wish list, the notice to void, whatever, the contingency just goes away. This is not an automatic extension type of contingency. It's just done. In the event that the buyer wishes to negotiate, to try to get some repairs done, they've sent their wish list, let's say on day 5. Day 5 then, once they've delivered their wish list with the full copy of the report, becomes day 0 of the negotiation period, right? Delivery is day 0. So you've put in here that there is a negotiation period, a blank number of days from when you've sent your wish list. The wish list officially is the inspection contingency removal addendum, which we will be going over on Wednesday. I don't like anything less than 5 here in the negotiation period. I mean, maybe it could be 3 if the property is in really great condition. Just be aware when you're making the offer based on the condition of the property, because you might need time for yourself and your buyer to determine whether the buyer is going to take on some things on their own in that negotiation period. And that's a back and forth for both parties, right? For that total number of days. At the end of the negotiation period, if there has not been an agreement between the buyer and the seller, so that inspection contingency removal addendum has not been ratified, the buyer election period kicks in, and the buyer has blank number of days to take the home in as-is condition with no repairs whatsoever, or they can void the contract. I would suggest if you are working on in the negotiation period and it looks like you're getting close, don't let the negotiation period expire. Get something signed extending the negotiation period. Don't let it expire.
So is the buyer election period, that's just an additional amount of time for them to decide, so like. I guess.
Yeah, let's say the wish list is sent and seller's like, I'm not doing anything. They say on day one, I'm not doing anything. And the buyer's like, well, come on, do something. And they're like, nope, not doing anything. You have to wait until 9 p.m. on day 5. And then after 9 p.m., the buyer can say, okay, I'm out, but they can't void before that.
Okay, so they can't void before the end of the negotiation.
Right.
And then they have an additional period to decide whether they want to.
Yes,
Okay, so.
yes. Now, the home inspection with option to void only says the same thing as that first paragraph said, that there's blank number of days for a licensed professional insured inspector to do the inspection. And by 9 p.m. on that blank number of days, the buyer can void. And if they're going to void, they have to deliver a full copy of the report. Now, here's what you guys have all been waiting for. It's made it worth staying after 12. This is how you do the for information only home inspection. These last 2 paragraphs in the right to void only section, in DocuSign, you take that red line and you put an X through these 2 paragraphs right here, this one and this one, and then you put a hash mark on the side, you have everybody initial. And what that does is it requires a time period for the buyer to do their inspection. It requires that it be a licensed and insured home inspector. It requires the utilities to be on. It gives that automatic extension period if the utilities were off. It sets the expectation clearly for everybody of what has to happen, and it removes the ability for the buyer to void if they are unhappy with the results. Isn't that much nicer than home inspection for information only? Because I'll tell you, I had an agent a couple of months ago that told me that the buyer's brother-in-law was coming to do the inspection with the buyer on there for information only. And I asked if the brother-in-law was licensed, and the answer was no. And I said, did you know they have to be licensed? I said, no, I didn't know they had to be licensed. And I said, okay. So this is why I've been talking about this for a while. And it's not clear, the home inspection for information only, on what the expectations are, on when they have to be let in, for how long they have to be there, like all of those things. This is just, everybody's operating under the same rules. The expectations are the same, okay? Radon testing.
Oh, Shannon,
Yes.
sorry.
Shannon?
Help me understand something at that point, though.
And 1 second, Mary.
I think you're so confident. So, but on the first paragraph, the first words say the contract is contingent on the inspection.
Yeah. Yep,
If
and
you're going with for information purposes only by X amount of those last two paragraphs, how do you counter argue the claim that's so contingent?
well, it is contingent because the seller has to let the buyer in to do the home inspection. And so back in that property maintenance and condition paragraph, you're checking the box that says it is contingent.
Right.
And you're including this addendum.
Right.
And so it is contingent on the seller letting them in. And so the seller would be in breach of a contract term if they didn't allow them in for the inspection.
Oh, is it contingent upon the conduct of inspection, not contingent on the results of inspection?
Correct.
Gotcha,
That's correct.
gotcha.
Yep. So Ron's question was, how is it contingent? And it's contingent on allowing the inspection to occur. It's not a contingency like the results allow the buyer to get out type of contingency. It's a contingency that the buyer's allowed to get in to the property. Okay, Mary, what's your question?
Yeah, what if the buyer bring like 4 of his friends with him in the inspection day? Are you allowing anybody except the buyers to be with you in the inspection day inside the house?
In addition to the inspector?
Yeah, they are bringing 4 of, the buyer bringing 4 of his friends to take opinions and to be with us. So there will be like 6 people and me and the inspector inside the house in the inspection day.
I'd ask the listing agent for permission.
Yeah, so shall I allow them to come in?
Ask the listing agent for permission.
Okay. Yeah. But it is very confusing to the buyers to like listen to everyone's opinion beside the inspector opinion. So it was very distracting. So I don't know if.
So in that case, then I would say talk to the inspector and to the listing agent, and maybe they don't want anyone extra in, and set the expectations with your buyer.
Okay.
Yep. So for radon testing, it's the same type of contingency. There's blank number of days for modification, and the testing guidelines are set here. And if the report comes in with the results above 4.0, then they can ask for remediation. So the buyer cannot ask for remediation if it comes in at 3, because that's not above the EPA standards. They might not like that it comes in at 3, but they can't ask for mitigation based on that. So set the expectations with your client. Radon negotiation period, same as up top. Election period, buyer can walk away if it's not going to be mitigated. Generally speaking, the cost to put in a remediation system is between $1,200 and $1,500. So again, not earth shattering. It could be a cost of more than that if a seller doesn't remediate and has to go back in the market, and you have to disclose that there's radon, because there could be buyers that are just completely turned off and they don't want to even look at a property that had radon at any point.
So Shannon, I have been for the radon negotiation periods, tending to have that last a couple of days longer than the housing inspection, because I've been getting my housing inspections back earlier than the radon. The radon system had to stay for a couple of days to operate before the floors come back. Is that problematic? So
because the radon results come sometimes after the home inspection, the kit will be left, the testing kit will be left during the home inspection. You would put the inspection contingency period a few days longer, because not the negotiation period.
What? That's what.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So however you're going to do it, sometimes the inspectors will drop off the kit before the home inspection a couple days before and grab it when they come for the inspection, and then sometimes they'll leave it during the inspection and pick it up later. So just know what the logistics are and the timing before writing the offer on, you know, what your inspector does. All right, that's all I'm going to do for you guys today. I am going to set you all free, and I'll answer any questions that anybody has on today's content. So I'm going to stop sharing. All right.
I have a question.
Hi, Allie.
So if we did write in the other section about the gap in the appraisal, does that supersede the financing addendum where you mark the dates? You know, you have 21 days or whatever. If that expires, but it's written in the other section, would it still be enforceable?
So the 21 days for the appraisal contingency doesn't actually expire. It automatically extends until it's removed. So you still have to negotiate. You still have to put in writing what the new price is. I would say that the reason I want to have it in an addendum instead of on the other terms is so there isn't any confusion about whether something in an addendum supersedes what's in the other terms or vice versa. So that's why we're going to do it in an addendum now.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Shannon. I have a question.
Hi, Young.
Hi, everybody. Okay. My seller is married, but her tax record has only her name on it. She lives in Florida. I don't think that has anything to do with it, but everything so far has her name on it. Is that okay that her husband's name's not included on it if he did not participate in the purchase of the house?
Yeah, he's not relevant.
Okay. Well, he was relevant in this negotiation, believe me, but okay. thank you.
He doesn't have to, he wouldn't sign anything if he's not on the deed. He doesn't have to, you don't have to worry about it.
Okay, and then one more question. This particular situation, the seller has not wanted to do anything. So would it be just a moot point to even ask if she would be willing to do a home warranty at this stage once we're ratified, or it's just unnecessary?
I would say it's probably unnecessary unless they're getting a home inspection with right to negotiate.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Shannon. I have a question or more of a comment. There's a spot where you can check if the seller or buyer is a real estate agent. And when you check that accidentally, you can't take it off. Is there a way to get that fixed in the future?
So you can take it off, but I know that some people are having trouble with it. So I need to go in and play around and figure out what circumstance is making it stuck, because I have been able to take it off when I try it. So I need to go and play around and see what's making it stick.
Okay.
Because I have heard a couple times that it's sticking, and then I go in and I test it and then I can uncheck it. So I'm still working on recreating the issue so that I can send it to DocuSign.
So in the interim,
Thank
just
you.
line through that somehow.
Absolutely.
But in the interim, though, should she or I kind of just line through that?
Mhm.
That'd be fine.
Yeah.
Without having to have initials set up because you're editing.
You would, if you cross through the paragraph, then you would have initials next to it.
Shannon?
Yes, Mary.
If there is a relation between you and the lender, like your brother or your husband is a lender, the lender of the transaction, is there any addendum you have to disclose to the listing agent you are putting offer on her listing?
There is not.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. All right. I will see everyone on Wednesday, 9 a.m.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you,
guys.
Shannon.
Have a great rest of the day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank
Go
you.
outside.
Thank
Nice out.